Welcome! You are listening to the CRM Success Show, where you will hear from CRM executives who have overseen some of the most interesting and complex CRM implementations. Your hosts, David Masri and Kira Whitey, will be bringing you real stories, real insight. Follow along on social media for updates on new episode releases, exclusive content, and much more. Enjoy the show, and thanks for listening.
Welcome to the CRM Success Show, where we deep dive into CRM success and failure, delivering real stories with real impact. I'm Dave Masri.
And I'm Kira Whitey.
And today we're talking with Chris Trivers, who's the enterprise Salesforce leader and VP at Valley Strong Credit Union.
A pleasure to have you on the show, and thanks for giving up your time to speak with us today. So Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in the ecosystem and what you're kind of currently up to at Valley Strong Credit Union.
Yeah. So I the headlines with me are basically I have 30 years in financial services, about 15 years in Salesforce. So seen a lot of innovation and changes in the ecosystem throughout the year with some fairly big names in the financial services. Started out with GE Capital, then went to TD Bank, City National Bank, and then my latest stop at Valley Strong Credit Union.
Nice. And you were recently involved in Dreamforce this year just gone. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it had been a while since I've been back at Dreamforce, and just jumped right in the deep end and did a little session on innovation within the credit union space. Nice.
And is that something that listeners could go back and listen to? I'm assuming it was pre-recorded in some.
Yeah, I'm sure it's out there somewhere in the ether.
Nice. All right. So Chris, why were you hired into Valley Strong Credit Union?
Great question. So they were undergoing a greenfield implementation where they were rolling out multiple Salesforce products to about 600 team members. And they were well within the project when they realized that it might be better to have a product owner. So I was recruited to come in and bring my 15 years of experience over to Valley Strong to help them in the transition of their financial services implementation.
Awesome. What exactly do Valley Strong Credit Union do, and credit unions, in general? How do they make money? How do they operate?
Yeah, so Valley Strong Credit Union is an 86-year-old credit union, primarily located in the Central Valley of California, the breadbasket of the world. So we have about $4 billion in assets and about 360,000 members. So fairly decent sized credit union. It pales in comparison to some of the banks, but it's a top 120 credit union. Located in 6 counties within the Central Valley. What intrigued me about coming to Valley Strong is it's kind of grassroots banking, right? So, we've heard a lot about Wall Street versus Main Street, but credit unions live on Main Street. And when I first got there, I didn't really understand the difference. Hey, I've been in financial services all those years; it'd be a piece of cake. But I kind of learned pretty quickly that, there are some major differences, in terms of credit unions and banks. Primarily credit unions are member-owned organizations, as banks are shareholder-owned. So typically that leads to better service, better rates, things of that nature. It was, the other piece of it is that because credit unions are membership driven, there are membership requirements. Just like if you join, any type of group, you typically it's either geography based or based, in an industry or something like that. So definitely a different world than a profit driven bank. Definitely has its positives and negatives, but it's a great place to work and get back to the communities that we operate in.
Nice. And I know we're going to discuss some of the differentiators between banking and credit union later in the podcast. So credit unions and especially Valley Strong, they focus on personal lending, commercial lending, home lending, auto lending. What exactly? A bit of everything, or what's like the main that they?
I mean, it varies. We happen to be a full suite, so we have everything that you mentioned: personal, business, auto, wealth. So a little of everything, anything that our members might need. Not all credit unions are like that. I would say the majority of folks focus on the consumer side or the retail side of the business.
Okay, got it. So you've been with Valley Strong Credit Union for almost 2 years. You talked about kind of why you initially brought in, but where was their journey with Salesforce prior to you joining, Chris?
So they had started a Salesforce project, rolling out Financial Services Cloud, MuleSoft, Tableau, and Marketing Cloud. They did not have a CRM previously, so it was kind of like brand new territory for the organization.
And you joined. It was a greenfield implementation, but how much of it was done prior to you joining?
It was I would say about 3/4 of the way done. It was a system integrator led project that we're utilizing folks from the team, but there was very little Salesforce knowledge within the organization. So, as we all know, Salesforce is different structure than other CRM systems. So it was like almost like a foreign language to people. And I've always kind of viewed my role as being that translator between Salesforce and business. To try to make sure that the business knows what they're getting, and we design the correct products, if you will.
Got you. So there was a SI. We know from speaking earlier, there was an SI that were supporting the credit union as you joined, correct?
Yes.
Good stuff. So why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you encountered as you were coming into the brand new implementation of Salesforce, 3/4 of the way complete. What were some of the obvious challenges, and what were some of the concerns or observations that, as you were in the role for a couple of months, you started to uncover as a result of not being there from the get-go?
Yeah. So, in terms of joining, a train that's already going down the track, right? You don't really know why decisions were made, who made those decisions, things of that nature. They're just that way. And really my job when I got in was to get that train to the station, and there was certain deadlines that we had to meet in terms of our marketing automation tool, that we were going away from Marquee to Marketing Cloud. We had to make sure that was up and running, or there would be member impact. So there's a lot of decisions that had to be made in terms of getting it to the station. Using the train analogy. So that was the primary role when I first got in, and again, it was a little handicapped because probably wouldn't have made some of the decisions that were made early on. Had to bring people up to speed in terms of what was the right way to do things. So yeah, it was a challenge, but we got to the station.
Awesome. So just taking this a bit of a step back, you said they were 3/4 of the way to done. Done is probably the most confusing word in the systems landscape. So that means 3/4 of the way done development, or project complete, which would probably mean you're starting UAT or testing, or were you guys like 3/4 build complete, then you still had?
No, it was 3/4 the way done the project. So we were just about in UAT, and we had to get that project to the station in time. So it was And again, when UAT started, not soon after I got there, again, there was questions, why are we doing this? Is this, intended behavior, all those type of things when you go through, UAT. So yeah, it was an interesting but fun time.
So I get a lot of banking background experience, not a tremendous amount of credit unions. One of the things when rolling out CRM for the first time in a bank is moving from a very financial account centric way of thinking to more household person centric way of thinking. Did you guys have that kind of shift as well?
Yes. Again, one of the challenges that, with the core system that we use, it was account centric and not member centric. So we had to essentially
Financial accounts, right? That's what you mean. It's incredibly confusing for Salesforce people.
Yeah.
So it just,
correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, it was, that's part of the challenge is if you go into our core, Chris Trivers might have a whole bunch of financial accounts or products, right? And those all show up. However, when you roll those up into Salesforce, you have to roll that up into one person. And that becomes a challenge when you start to bring over the data and make sure that you're getting that. And then sometimes I might even have multiple memberships, right? So, which is the winning membership, things of that nature. So there's a lot of decisions that you have to be made about how the data gets transformed and brought into Salesforce.
You guys went with like some kind of MDM, or how'd you do that?
Originally, we went with an ETL tool that did that, and now we have transitioned to MuleSoft that's doing that for us.
So MuleSoft is matching your contact records across your various systems?
No, MuleSoft is taking the product information from our core system and transforming it and into a member-centric platform within Salesforce.
I see. So again, I'm thinking more the banking world. Where the what I've seen is they'll have, let's say, a retail banking for your bank accounts core system. They might have a loan management system. They might have another system for credit cards or for auto in your case. And then there's nothing matching the people up, right? It's either the 12 financial accounts you said you might have.
Right.
Right. So with that, something you had to tackle?
Most of that information was already in our core. Think about a core in the sense it's almost like an ERP, right? It had all that data in there, but it was very linear in that there would be 10 records for Chris as opposed to just the one. And then when you bring it into Salesforce with a relational database, you have to have one member, Chris, and then multiple financial accounts or products that flow into that.
Real cool. And you did that with the MuleSoft?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So tell us about that shift, that mindset shift, right? How did you tackle that? How did you educate your user base?
Yeah, it's challenging because we had used our core system almost as a CRM. So in the past, if Chris walked into the branch, they would look up my membership and look up my information. The goal was to get them into Salesforce and use that as the UI. But there was still some resistance in that, I don't see this membership. Well, the membership was there, which is rolled up and consolidated into one record, right? So there's a lot of white glove service that we had to do, hypercare in terms of making sure that people understood how to find that. After we rolled it out, we also rolled it out kind of in multiple ways so that we could launch and learn as we went.
Okay, cool. And when you took over, what were the biggest challenges of like coming in, 75% in the way and almost build complete, if not build complete, and then you're coming in with all this expertise that, let's say, the organization didn't have.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest challenge is I think previously we kept deferring decisions down the road. And then with the burning platform of our marketing automation system going on, we had to make some tough decisions about getting that out, getting that into the hands of the marketers. So that was probably the biggest piece is just we didn't have the luxury of time. We had to make essentially battlefield decisions to ensure that the project hit its deadlines. Otherwise, we would have been without anything to market to our members.
Can you give us an example of one of those?
Well, just essentially just not being, the marketing automation system was going away, right? So how do we get that out the door? How do we get Marketing Cloud out the door? So we went with a little bit more basic, what we call a member 360, or you might hear about customer 360 within the ecosystem to ensure that we could get the product out the door.
Okay. And what about were there any decisions made by the SI that you coming in now with a different perspective? Because I'm sure, I don't know which SI you used, but I'm sure, right, someone who's coming in, what you said, 15 or 20 years of financial service experiences, right? You had, let's say, strong opinions on how things should be done. Were there any where you come in and thought yeah, I just disagree with how this was done by the SI, and then you had to make a decision with either I'm going to roll forward with this or try to pivot or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is what we're kind of touching on is the data side of the equation. My preference would have been to roll out MuleSoft first, as opposed to kind of a basic ETL tool to transform the data. I mean, heck, we spent a lot of money on MuleSoft. Number one, number two, it's a better tool. So I think that's probably it, because any implementation is going to live and die by the data, and the features you can tweak. You can bring more features in, take features away if they're too much. But if the data is screwed up, then that kind of is the death knell for any type of CRM implementation. Or if we want to have CRM success, you need to have a successful data strategy. And I think we did, but it would have been better, I think, if we had utilized MuleSoft from the beginning.
So you changed that when you came in? They weren't using MuleSoft?
Yeah, that we weren't using. We had a very limited use of MuleSoft, and we did that kind of after the launch of the MVP. We brought in MuleSoft.
I see. Okay. The only other thing, maybe we should touch on Tableau. Where'd that sit in this whole thing?
So Tableau, we don't have a huge footprint of Tableau. It's mainly used for access with our data warehouse, our data lake, and so that's where it's primarily used. We have used some Tableau connectors to portray some of that data within Salesforce. So that's been really the only crossover into the CRM itself, other than the fact that Tableau is a Salesforce product.
So Chris, what were you moving, or I guess what were the credit union moving away from? For example, they were moving towards Marketing Cloud. What marketing system did they have in place prior?
There was a tool called Marquee, which was we weren't using any CRM capabilities. It was primarily a marketing automation system. So that was the system that we were sunsetting to bring it into Marketing Cloud.
What about on the core side? Were they using kind of any kind of Sales Cloud, similar type of product, CRM, core CRM prior to Salesforce?
There was nothing prior to us coming in. And again, one of the reasons why we wanted to have a system like Salesforce is that as a growing institution, as an innovative institution, we wanted to make sure that we were scalable for the future, right? So we had just come off 2 acquisitions. There's always talk about additional ones. While people would love to run their business off of Excel spreadsheets, that becomes extremely difficult the bigger you get. we have a extremely big footprint, 300, 400 miles from tip to tip. So it's, again, tough to manage something like that without a CRM system. So one of the reasons that we implemented Salesforce was just to kind of help future-proof our organization.
I think the pandemic accelerated a lot of that thinking for companies, right? The digital push, the digital age. It's surprising you hear about these businesses that have been in business and thriving for 50, 60 years that are still on spreadsheets, right? And haven't adopted a CRM yet. It's quite fascinating. And, there's a lot of opportunity there for individuals, partners, etc. as well. So talking of partners, so we touched on that the union were heavily reliant on an SI, 3/4 of the implementation done by them, not really any Salesforce team at all in place, Chris, prior to your arrival, correct?
Correct.
So how did you go about transitioning the reliance from the SI to building the team in-house? What did that look like? I'm assuming it wasn't let's go hire 3 people overnight kind of thing. Did it take time to get the business ready from a mindset, why the benefits of having a team in-house were? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so, it was an interesting process. It probably took a year from launch to starting to build the Salesforce Center of Excellence at Valley Strong, or as I call it, the Salesforce practice. It was a journey. We went out and we interviewed a lot of different credit unions of equal size or larger. We touched on the differences between banks and credit unions. Credit unions are very open to talking to their competitors and, sharing best practices and things of that nature. It's encouraged. We have a roundtable with Salesforce with Jim Collins. He helps mediate that. In the banking world, there's not as much cooperation or collaboration, but we essentially went on a tour from Chicago to New York, visiting 3 or 4 different credit unions that had been doing it for a while and try to understand their secret sauce. And where it really came back out to is they all had internal teams. The internal teams had, functional knowledge, and then they brought Salesforce expertise to the bear of that. So after that, we started formulating a plan of, hey, let's bring folks in who know the various functions. So today I have 4 business analysts who work for me, all of whom know nothing about Salesforce. So it's a bit of a process to teach them Salesforce and teach them business analysts. So it's been a lot of fun in terms of doing that. Everyone's extremely open, but the thought is, hey, if they know the business, they know where all the pain points are, they know the systems, things of that nature. So that's the process we're doing. We've since hired a senior engineer. So we're starting to put the pieces in place in terms of both the technical and the functional side of the place. But like I said, it took a bit to get there. So, even now that we're entering, year 2, essentially, those pieces are just being plugged into place. And the hope is that we become less and less reliant on the system integrators.
Got you. So again, find it fascinating. Credit unions are a lot more collaborative than competitive, let's say. I'm sure they compete, right? There's going to be some crossover. There's going to be some gray area where maybe battling for the same type of customer in some cases. But why do you think there is a lot more positivity around collaboration versus we're not sharing how we're innovating because we don't want you to get the upper hand on us? Can you pinpoint that to anything?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is, again, the membership. Our members, there's very little crossover in our members, right? So my members in Central Valley of California are probably not going to be a member of a credit union in New York. But I think it goes more to that, is just being more community focused, being, less, just kind of in the DNA to do that. And that's the part that I always loved about the Salesforce Ohana. Everyone is very collaborative, but then when you kind of get in your industry vertical and you want to understand like what people are doing, people tend to clam up. So I do think it's a bit of less overlap of members, but more so just what is in the DNA of a credit union is we're here to serve our members. And there's 4,500 or some odd credit unions in the U.S. And it's we want Main Street to survive over Wall Street. So it's a nice world. What we've been told by Salesforce is credit unions are the fastest growing vertical within their financial services vertical. So it's also nice to be part of a rising tide, I guess. So yeah, it is very refreshing. I made some good contact, good friends within the industry when we went to Dreamforce. It was great to meet everybody and kind of just celebrate, shall we say?
Yeah. Other than the collaborative aspect and knowledge sharing, the willingness to kind of help one another, anything else you found surprising or on the flip side unexpected? Negatively, let's say, compared to your time that was more heavily focused on the banking side?
Well, I mean, it's at the bank, we had bigger budgets, we had more headcount, we had kind of more defined roles. Here, I wear many hats, right? So I'm the product owner, I'm teaching the BAs. I'm also a business analyst, so at the previous bank that I worked at, I had 10 or so BAs that worked for me. So then we probably had about 20, 25 within the organization. So it's definitely a different scale. But it's also a different mentality in terms of making sure that we get our hands dirty, that we wear many hats, that we get the job done, and it's, don't point fingers.
Smaller teams and doing more with less is something that we often hear from people like yourself and other guests we've had on the show over the last few months. And I think it's something that's going to continue to be a topic. How do we do more with less? Any tips or quick wins that you've experienced in particular with operating on with smaller headcount, Chris, from that bigger team environment coming from the big corporate banks to go into a smaller credit union? Any advice for other leaders that maybe find themselves with a similar predicament?
I think stakeholders are extremely important. So who are the proponents? Who are the opponents of Salesforce? Get to know them, understand why. We discovered some Salesforce expertise that was existing in our retail organization, and that's been like a home run, right? So, this individual had some experience with Salesforce, was very driven to get more knowledge, took on a role within the retail organization, and is now as qualified as any Salesforce person I ever met, right? So there's that hidden talent out there that you might not know about. And again, that individual worked for one of our largest stakeholders and biggest proponents of Salesforce, the biggest advocates. So it's kind of a win-win, right? So that was a big piece of it, is find out, that hidden talent. And then really just the approach that we're going on now is solving pain points for the functions or the stakeholders. Once you do that, then they see, oh, wow, then I could probably use Salesforce for this issue or that issue, as opposed to it being, oh, it's just a sales tool.
So what about the reverse? Anything you think the credit union world can learn from the banking world?
There's got to be something, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think the biggest thing is, allow the experts to get the job done. There's a lot of consensus building, a lot of meetings where you're trying to get agreement on things, and that kind of slows us down in that regard. The other piece of it is if credit unions by nature are not fast followers. But if we want to be innovative, we want to catch up to the banks, whether they be community or large banks, we have to kind of invest the dollars, right? So, it's a bit of that, we're losing the arms race if we don't do that. So, those would be like, kind of the things that come to my thought, is just in terms of the, hey, let's build the best product. Let's get it out the door in an MVP fashion. Let's make sure that we have the budgets to be successful, and get it done, and keep building incrementally onto the product.
Cool. So, can you tell us a little bit more about the membership model? What did that mean? That means I open an account, or I take a loan, or I have to pay a membership fee? Like, how does that work?
So there's typically rules, right? So in our case, we're geographically based. You have to live, work, or worship it in one of our 6 counties, right? So that's part of membership. The membership is basically a $5 share account, which is essentially a savings account, right? So it's you're funding your savings account with $5, and that's your membership. Other credit unions, you might be, we started out as a credit union for teachers, right? So we served the teachers of Kern County. Every big company, General Electric had one, will have credit unions, right? So if you work at credit General Electric, you can join their credit unions. It's a bit like the USAA model. If you were in the military, or a relative was in the military, you can join USAA. Same type of thing with a credit union. So it's if you're living in Ohio, and you don't have any tie-in to one of our 6 counties, i.e. you didn't used to live there and joined, you can't necessarily become a member. So, that's really how the membership works.
So, I mean, how can you possibly grow and compete with the big bank, if that's the goal, which I don't think it is the goal, if you're limiting yourself to like 6 counties?
Well, keep in mind those 6 counties have millions and millions of people. But there are other ways to do it. I mean, you can join. There's indirect models where you can get, an auto loan and not necessarily be in there. But to be a traditional member, you have to be in that world. And then the other way to grow is, through acquisition, getting new territories. Again, we have about 400 miles of territory. There's a lot of white space in those areas. So, just providing better services, telling the Valley Strong story, things of that nature, will continue to grow.
Forgive the naiveness, Chris. It might be a dumb question, but what's stopping a credit union just saying, I'll lend money to whoever I want, whether they're on the East Coast, Central, West, whatever, I don't care. I'm just going to take on everyone. Is there a gentleman's agreement with all the owners of credit unions that, you are only allowed to do business in certain states, or do you have to get some kind of
Well, you're either a state chartered credit union, or you're a federally chartered, and there's very few federally chartered one. So there are credit unions, the bigger ones that you might know of, who have offices all over the country. Some of them are federally chartered. Some of them just have more expansive territories. The other way to do that is potentially, you can buy a membership and join that way. But typically, people that's a more indirect way of joining. But yeah, I mean, you would get in trouble with the regulators if you did what you are suggesting.
It's kind of there's a legal difference and law. The laws surrounding how credit unions have to operate it different than how banks
correct.
have to operate.
Yeah, and keep in mind that credit unions are tax exempt, right? So if you would get in trouble and lose that, that's a huge huge penalty to pay, shall we say?
So we talked a bit about BAs in your team, and that's been a reoccurring piece to your role. And when you build teams, it's building with the BA mindset of resources. So we just want to cover a little bit more on that area. How typically do you go about finding the balance between an admin, developer, BAs? What do you think a good BA should bring to the table?
First of all, they need to have that passion. You have to ask, the whys, and I call it the 5 whys. It's almost like putting that toddler in you. Why, daddy? Why? You have to get into that nature. So that's a big piece of it. In the Salesforce world, it's obviously extremely important to understand the Salesforce piece of it. But fundamentally, with being a business analyst, it's about finding those pain points and trying to bring to bear a technology, in this case, Salesforce, to help assist with that. So it's just, when I first started, it was very much admin, and admin driven, and what you become is almost order takers. Hey, I have this issue, or hey, I need this report. And you don't necessarily have a seat at the table. If you have a business analyst viewpoint, and your role is to solve pain points for either the members or the team members, then that's a wonderful thing. You can start to look at things like, how you're making processes more efficient, how you're saving, the institution money. It's much more of a optimistic, shall we say, standpoint than being a ticket taker or an order taker, which, if you're in as an admin, or really in a lot of IT worlds, that, hey, something's broke, fix it for me, as opposed to, hey, I've got an issue. Oh, you fixed it for me, you're my hero, type of thing. So it's really just a mind shift, if you will, of how to deploy that. And again, in some instances, you're still doing some admin capability, user support, things of that nature. So it's not like you're not doing those things. It's really about the balance. So, in my world, if you're 70% business analyst and 30% system admin, that's probably a good percentage, if you will. So, that's kind of my viewpoint. And what I've seen is, as Salesforce gets more complicated, the admin, it's tougher for that admin to be a developer too, and a business analyst. So you need to have a little bit more understanding of the roles. And what I tend to view the world as, either you're technical, i.e. a developer, you're functional, i.e. your business analyst, or you're or your system admin, which is kind of in that in-between area. And they can kind of go either way, right? They can either be part functional, or they could be part technical, depending on their expertise. But I definitely think once you get in the mindset of solving, people's pain points, functional issues for an organization, you start to get that seat at the table. You get bigger budgets, you get more people. It becomes more of a flywheel in terms of what you're doing, because you're showing that value.
So, do you think that their roles should change based on where you are in the development cycle? So, for example, if you're a project heavy focused, maybe they should have more skills around process diagramming and understanding the process flow, let's say the account opening process, and then writing that into terms of technical details. And then maybe when you're in more maintenance mode, they might need more I don't know, emotional skills that can work with the user and, let's say, talk them off a cliff. I don't know.
Well, the truth, at least what I've experienced, is you're always in both of those worlds. There's some things that are in maintenance, some of the things that you're growing capabilities. So in my estimation, you kind of need a bit of both. It's really about focus. And in financial services, because we're heavily regulated, you don't necessarily want to have too much people drifting too much into the development side. So there tends to be more of a divide there. But I do think that you need kind of a bit of both worlds. You need to make sure that things aren't broken, and if they are broken, you need to get them fixed. And then you also need to be doing new kind of groundbreaking things.
But you don't think it should change based on where you are in the development cycle?
No, because I mean, in my world, you're kind of you're all over the place, right? So I think from my perspective, you need to have kind of a foot in both worlds.
Okay, what about the line between the BA and the SA, the system admin, or an architect, let's say? Where do you draw that line? Like, how much should a good BA be involved in the system design from a technical perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, the organizations like a credit union typically don't have the firepower to have a solutions architect on hand. In general, I kind of coach my BAs. We don't solution. You might have a suggested solution, but we want to get the user stories. We want to make sure that we understand the pain points, but we don't necessarily want to go and say, hey, this is the way to do it, because it may not be the way to do it. So we can help influence that. And typically in my worlds, that's been more on the technical side of the equation. Again, we can help influence it and say, hey, this is a proposed solution. But ultimately, we want to make sure that it's scalable. And it may work in a limited use case, but may not work if in a much broader use case. So typically that solutioning is more on the engineering side in our world.
Wow. So in the Salesforce world, particularly on the SI side, I would say they would very much think that a BA did a lot of solutioning, particularly when it comes to the low code stuff.
Right.
Right. Do you think that's a mistake?
No, I mean, I think it works in their model.
That there should be a clear
one. Again, in our world, heavily regulated, typically no. If it's truly configurations, right? That's kind of a gray area. We can do more if the BAs know how to configure. But if it's truly development, I've always seen that exist on the engineering side as opposed to the functional side. That, to me, that's that clear division of responsibilities.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think it's more of a typical BA role, which really it should. Like Salesforce likes to, or I get the Salesforce world likes to kind of play with these names a little bit, right? The BA is kind of like a developer. They used to have to pass the developer cert, then they changed the developer cert to a platform developer. And same thing, honestly, with the admin role. Like the admin role also, like I've always hated the term admin. I was like, because I feel like a system admin should be dealing with things like password resets, logging into the system, training, not necessarily solutions. So where do you see a Salesforce admin? Are they a BA? Are they an SA? Or
so they're either in that gray area or their responsibilities are part of a BA, kind of that 70-30 split. At my last bank, we did typical system administration stuff, but it was only 30% of our time. And granted, we could spread that over 10 folks. So there was bandwidth there. At my at Valley Strong, we have an admin, a dedicated admin. But I do think that anybody who's on the functional side should have some business analyst experience, and also should have some system admin experience as well.
So in terms of the BA piece, so I guess where do BAs go wrong when you're interviewing for BAs? I'm sure you have some interview questions. We're not asking you to give away your secret questions, but what makes a good BA in your opinion? What gives you the kind of inclination when you're interviewing individuals for a BA role that they're going to be successful in their role?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, the first thing when I do when I'm interviewing is make sure that everybody understands what's the operational definition of a business analyst, because it varies from organization to organization. Typically in our world, it goes from everywhere from intake to training. And then kind of in the middle, it goes into the development stream, but you're kind of involved in everything but the development from that perspective. What makes a good BA is really that understanding of what is the pain point, why are we doing this? I try to tell the BAs that have worked for me is like, look, for this initiative, you are the product owner. If I come to you and I want you to I want to understand why we're doing it, not just because someone said they needed to do it. Again, that's more of that order taking mentality. So understanding the context, what are we trying to solve for? Are all big things. That passion is extremely important. Tool usage, right? So you have to be able to do current and future process maps. So you need to understand those. With your tool of choice, it doesn't really matter to me whether it's PowerPoint or Miro or anything like that. That becomes extremely important again to show that. And then the other piece of it is just making sure that you measure. So like, what is the elapsed time in the current process? So how do we know if we're making a difference, right? So those are the things that I kind of look for, and making sure that they are motivated, because it might take 2 months to get a good business requirement document done, right? But once you do it, that becomes a living, breathing document that we can look at, both before, during, and after the project. So I think that's the piece of it that I look for when I'm interviewing.
Where do you see the good BAs come in from? And when I ask that question, I'm thinking more, does an admin typically make a good BA, or is it, or are some of the good BAs that you've hired, they've started out perhaps as a IT BA or a business BA, and they've learned the Salesforce piece secondary to. So I guess the question is, do you like your BAs coming from a Salesforce admin background, transition into the business side of things, or do you prefer solid BA skill set learning Salesforce? What do you find is easier to teach?
And just to tack on to that, how important is industry knowledge?
Well, you're asking the tough questions now.
We didn't say it was going to be easy, Chris.
The truth be told is you can do it either way, right? You can hire somebody who knows Salesforce and teach them business analysts, and you can hire people who don't know business analysis and teach them Salesforce. I think out of all those things, the one piece that's harder to learn is the functional knowledge. So if I am a BA for a retail team, I need to know something completely different than our central operations team. So you also need to have functional ability as well. So the path that we're going down at Valley Strong is to hire folks who have that functional knowledge, and then teach them both business analysts and Salesforce. That's a slower ramp up period, to be honest with you. But I think the rewards are greater at the end of it. At the bank, we hired people who were business analysts and knew Salesforce, and then we had to teach them the industry knowledge, right? So I think out of all those things, the industry knowledge is probably least, but it's also the secret sauce. If you don't understand how a financial institution makes money, or how they make sausages, I like to say, you're never going to be as successful. So you're never going to find the perfect candidate. So you have to kind of build to their strengths and support their development areas, if you will. And if they're going to be a great BA, they need to work on industry knowledge, Salesforce knowledge, and business analyst knowledge. And then the soft skills as well.
So I tend to find the industry and the soft skills are almost impossible to find outside the U.S., offshore, or even near shore, for whatever reason. I don't know if it's just the culture or what, but it's something that's really, really difficult. Before we move on, Kiro, that true? You can't find the perfect candidate?
We're going to have to talk offline about that, Chris. That's why we exist. But I do have a question that I know a lot of...
and one that's affordable.
Yeah, well, there you go. That might be you pay for what you get. Buy cheap, buy twice. But same for recruiters that you use. But in terms of, obviously, Salesforce brought out about 12 months ago a business analyst certification. With the more technical Salesforce roles, there's architect certs, there's marketing cloud certs, right? And the decision to bring out the BA cert, the cynical would say it was a great marketing moneymaker. Others would say it'd be to help companies to try and differentiate someone who is actually a BA versus an admin doing that 30% business analysis work, right? Again, just before we move on, is there any certification, whether it's Salesforce or unrelated, or type of study that you've seen good BAs they have in common? Like, is there a certain business analysis certification that you're aware of, or just kind of general project management cert that you found the good BAs tend to have, or field of study? Does that impact things?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I would probably advocate that Salesforce should have come out with a BA much sooner. That being said, if you pass their certification, doesn't mean that you're ready to be successful on day one. So, I think the bigger thing is knowing some of the adjacent things, like having, agile training, agile certification, right? Knowing how to do things within that framework. That's something you can learn on the job, but if you have that going in, I think that's big. Understanding some of the tools like Jira and things of those natures, I think are important. Hey, I just don't want you to be a user of it. I want you to be able to add new fields, do boards, do reporting and things of that nature, right? And that's always the tough thing, is how do you find out that, hey, Chris was just a user of Jira or Azure DevOps, but doesn't know how to do anything with it. So, I find those helpful. In general, what I have asked my team members to do is to get that. I still believe that the Salesforce certified admin, the 201 as we used to know it in the old days, is the foundation for everything, right? So they, if they're going to be long timers in dealing with Salesforce, they need to get that. They don't necessarily need to have it all right out of the gate, but other than that, I'm not sure that a ton of certifications are really required to do the job. In fact, I would probably advocate that it's kind of watered down the market, because everybody has one. It's kind of like the Oprah. Now, you get a certification, you get a certification, you get a certification, and you don't really know who has it. And you have people, and then it also goes with trailhead badges as well. Like, people can become double ranger and not necessarily know how to do some of these things, right? So it's a bit of a game to try to figure out like what people have. What I try to tell folks is, get your BA, get your associate, and get your admin, And then from there, decide, do you want to be on the technical side and go down those certifications and get more development skills, or do you want to stay on the functional side? In which case, you probably don't need too many more. Maybe some of the AI stuff, or the sales consultant, or what have you. Those become important. But at least in industry, I want you to have a strong foundation, which I think the certified Salesforce admin gives you. And then from there, you just build off of that, either on the developer side or on the functional side.
Okay, cool. So you said you came in right to Valley Strong. Project was near complete, or 3/4 through. My understanding is you're currently starting, or recently started, a new project to roll out Salesforce to your call centers. And now I guess you're kicking that off, right? So what did you do different right now, and particularly talking about all of these skills that you need? I assume you assembled some kind of team, right? How's that going? Or how'd you assemble that team? What was your plan here?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the biggest difference that we did when we started with the contact center transformation was really have the contact center be more involved in the project than we had previously with the other functions. The other functions, they were kind of passengers, probably backseat passengers, and they didn't really understand the product that they were getting, because they were not necessarily, they weren't helping navigate or drive the car, if you will. So with the contact center, we had them more involved in the in everything, right? So we had a business analyst, we had the contact center leader, we had their managers were all heavily invested in rolling out, or helping to design the product that we have. So I think from that perspective, that's kind of the lessons learned from the one to the other. So from that perspective, we also went with a different SI. So there's some different things that we did with that contact center transformation, other than what we did with the initial MVP for our CRM side.
So one of the interesting thing about contact centers, particularly contact center managers, is they tend to have very hard, strong KPIs. My call to resolution has to be under a minute and a half, and our reps have to take 35 calls a day, and we want 25% of the be like just absolute solid metrics. Did that drive or change how you run this project, or how you, like, in a way, it's nice that you have really, really super clear goals and you can measure against?
Yeah, no, 100%. And, as we talk about lessons learned, I've always been a sales cloud guy, and I always like rolling out to the sales teams. I understand that world, but it's also way harder to measure, to your point, right? You get on the service side, you have clear metrics that you want to look at, that you can help drive. Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Those type of things. And you can show the value that you're driving, depending on which way those metrics are going. So, from my perspective, it's nice to work on the service side. I hadn't had a lot of experience doing that, but it's certainly a good way to, to be able to measure the impact and what have you.
But did that change your approach at all?
I don't think it really changes the approach. I mean, you don't want to make it worse.
No,
and then, the thought is, we talked about this a bit offline, but, I think we measured that our contact center uses about 26 different applications throughout the day. Maybe obviously not on every call, but they're constantly going into other applications, and that slows down the process. There's a lot of handoffs that go on. So the whole goal in terms of that was to, like, hey, how can we eliminate some of those swivel chairs that they're doing? How do we make their roles a lot easier. Number one. Number two, if you think about a brand new team member who joins, 26 is a lot to learn, and some of them are simple, right? Outlook. But, some of them get very complex. Like how do you look up a credit card, go to the credit card portal and look things up there. So that's the other piece of it, is how do you make the ramp up time for a new one easier? If it's in my opinion, if it's all embedded in Salesforce, hopefully that makes it a little bit easier for folks to learn some of these disparate systems that they had to go into.
Yeah, well, I mean, since we're talking contact center, we have to ask, Agentforce is on your roadmap?
It's on a roadmap. It's a pretty big piece on the service side. Would love, it was interesting timing, because our second phase of the contact center was going to be bots anyways. So that, the choice becomes, do you go old fashioned bots, and use prompt builder and things of that nature, or do you use Agentforce? I think the preference is to go with Agentforce, but it's so new, right? And then it's also consumption based. I think it's a pretty scary thing. But it's nice to see the energy and the influence and the money that Salesforce is throwing behind that, in terms of giving incentives to customers, to SIs, what have you. So I see it definitely on our roadmap. The question is it this year or next year? That's kind of to be determined. Because the tough part about it is you do a great job and you consume all your consumption, then you have to buy more, right? If you buy too much, you don't use it. That's not a good thing either. So trying to find that Goldilocks strategy, the consumption that's just right to get some value from it, because at $2 or whatever it ends up being, a interaction that can add up quickly. So it's an interesting way to go, but I do think at some point we'll take a look at it. There are other credit unions, other banks who are looking at it for sure. It's just a question of like what use case you take, and how do you take your swing with getting the proving it out.
You're not saying you have to buy the credits in advance and it's use them or lose them. It is?
Yes.
That's not so really.
Yeah. So you're buying it. They roll over every month, but I believe it's after a year, after the year, if you don't use them, you've lost.
Oh, they eventually expire.
Right.
Okay. And I know you didn't say this, but you kind of implied it. You could go both, right? You can go with the traditional bot, because I really like the Einstein bots. I think they're great, right? You can go both.
No, you could definitely go both. We didn't have either, right? So it's like, where do you put your chips? Do you spread around your money, or do you put it on red and go with with Agentforce? So that's really what it boils down to. I believe that Agentforce will be easier to manage and to update than the Einstein bots, but I don't know that for a fact. But yeah, you could definitely do both. And there may be use cases where you want to use one or the other. In our world, it was like, like I said, do you spread around the chips on the roulette wheel, or do you just bet on red and go from there?
We're just conscious of time. So there is one other product that you're working on, Chris, that we talked about. So Spiff. So Salesforce acquired Spiff at the beginning of this year. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's all centered around additional motivation for sales teams, helping to build commission plans, automatic payouts, etc., making it easier for sales teams and sellers to understand commission and get paid and hit their targets quicker, correct?
Yeah, and then the other piece of that is the administrative burden on trying to get those people paid. Again, using spreadsheets or SharePoints or things of that nature becomes tough. So how do you make it, easier? How do you also look at things like exceptions. So there's always exceptions. Chris just joined last month, but he did a bang up job, so we want to give him something. But you got to make sure that's all audited and notated and what have you. But then the other piece of it is for that seller or frontline person, if it's embedded in Salesforce, they can literally say, hey, if I sell this loan, or this loan closes, that this is how much I'm going to make, or this is how much I stand to gain. So there's also a bit of that in terms of, kind of that calculation, not a huge piece of it, but, it's always, again, it's always tough to learn that or to show somebody that, but if it's embedded in Salesforce, it can kind of show where you are. And, then you have like the leaderboard and things of that nature that you can look at. So we're excited about it. There's not a lot of credit unions that have utilized it. One of the things that, experience matters at a credit union. So for the longest time, credit unions were not very sales driven. So we had the discussion earlier, like, how do we grow? Well, you try to get more products or more wallet share from members and things of that nature. So I think, it's also a step down the direction of how do we become a more sophisticated selling organization.
Love it. I mean, it sounds super intriguing, and I know there's a lot of other excitement in different industries about that product. So, good luck with the implementation. It sounds like a product that could really positively impact credit unions and give sales teams that additional incentive, but also the visibility on what they can stand to make if XYZ deal goes through, right? So all intriguing stuff. Well, Chris, we are at time. It's been an absolute delight having you on the show today. Our first guest talking exclusively or primarily on the topic of credit unions. So I learned a lot, Maz. I'm sure you did as well. Thanks again, Chris, for being a part of today's conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Enjoyed it.
For our future listeners and episodes, please do not forget to subscribe to the CRM Success Show for more takeaways and future episodes. And that's all for today. Thank you.